Hi everyone in English 20 through 23, it's Dr. E and I'm here with your weekly instructional video for week 5. If you haven't already, go and watch the supplemental video where I discuss information about the Romantic period, which not only will you have a couple quiz questions on, but it's a good way to just kind of digest all the information from when we read that. I know it seems like a lifetime ago, but just going back and take a look at that. What I'm going to do right now is, before I get into the actual instructions for the week, I want to just touch briefly on Anna Letitia Barbald. I didn't have time to do that in the supplemental video, but want to just address it right here. Okay, so I want you to note that Barbald is coming from kind of a practice of ballads, right? So ballads include things like song and recitation. So the actual poetry is somewhat lyrical in nature. Greenblatt from our text writes that it fueled the interest that many Romantic poets took in the sound effects that might reconnect printed poetry to the living voice, right? So as we read poetry, we won't read a ton of it this semester, but as we read it, when we actually do, I want you to note, how it sounds, and that means you should probably work on reading it aloud. That can be kind of complicated. Many of us are at home with various other folks, but just take some time to read the poetry out loud because it changes the way we hear some of the words. And some of it's interesting, especially because we're talking about British poets. So they have a different accent than we do. So sometimes we see on the page what may not actually appear to rhyme, but when we speak it aloud, it may rhyme a bit more, and when we think about the British accent, even more so. So just some things to kind of take into consideration, and note that poetry often requires rereading. Don't just whiz through the poem and expect to understand everything immediately. Sometimes you have to reread it, and in our course text, we have those footnotes, right? That information that's at the bottom of the page that's included by our editors. Read those. It really helps with the context and understanding of what the poets are working to do, even if those poets lived hundreds of years ago, okay? So back to Barbald and ballads. Ballads have particular forms, right? And more often than not, they're going to include things like repetition and refrain, right? They're going to kind of fold back on themselves a little bit to emphasize points or to emphasize those sounds. We have stanzas in ballads, right? Which are usually considered quatrains. Remember, quatrains, if you haven't had some of this background in poetry, don't be overwhelmed or worry, or some of you may need a refresher. Stanzas are just the different groups of words, right? So if we think of Barbald's poem, there are sets of words that she goes through. There's space between those stanzas, right? Those groups of lines. And quatrains are 4 lines, right? So quattro, 4, right? Alternating 4-beat, 3-beat, right, which will make sense in a second. And it's often, ballads are sung, right? So often there's that lyrical nature, whether they were sung as forms of poetry or not, right? So getting into Barbald specifically, she lived in the Romantic period, right? She was part of the nonconformist community, and I asked a question about dissenters on the last quiz, and that essentially just means that these are folks who were not necessarily a part of the Church of England, right? A lot of things at this time were run by the Anglican Church, the Church of England. If you went through British literature, the first section last semester, then there are a lot of issues when it comes to religion. So you have Henry VIII, who broke away from the Catholic Church so that he could then divorce his wife, Catherine, right? And then remarry Anne Boleyn. So that's not something that was accepted by the Pope or the Catholic Church at the time. So he formed his own church, which was the Church of England. And various things happen, right? We have Mary, his daughter, Mary Stuart, and then we have Queen Elizabeth, right, who changes from Catholic to Protestant, and then we get into lots of religious changes, but at this time it's the Anglican Church that's kind of in charge. So dissenting communities were those that were not a part of that belief system. Dissenters went to schools that, because Oxford, Cambridge, all of these really established and well-known schools only admitted people who followed that faith, right? So dissenters were not a part of that. complicated, right? So she wrote poems and miscellaneous pieces in prose in 1773. William Hazlitt cites her as an influence, and just so you know, Hazlitt just was a very well-known kind of critic at the time. So if Hazlitt mentions Anna Letitia Barbald, then she must have made it pretty well, you know, when she was publishing. Okay, so we have the Mouse's Petition, and I just wanted to include, you know, one little stanza, right, which is a quatrain that has 4 lines, just to give you a sense of kind of the balladry, right, the way that it sounds. So we have that, I'm going back here, that alternating 4-beat, 3-beat. So, oh, hear a pensive prisoner's prayer. So we have, oh, hear a pensive prisoner's prayer. 4, right? Okay. And then we have for liberty that sighs. 3, and never let thine heart be shut against the wretch's cry. So we have that alternating 4-beat, 3-beat. And when we think of ballads, it's, oh, hear a pensive prisoner's prayer for liberty that sighs. I'm actually singing in this week's video, just to let you know, it's on the quiz. Okay. So that's just a little bit of background just to kind of wrap up the Romantic period and what we learned about Barbald. There were questions on the quiz. One note about the quiz, I'm going to reopen that so that those of you who weren't able to take it because of all the issues that we were facing, you will have until Thursday to complete that, which means that in order to know this, you would have had to watch this video. So just a little hint there. You can also, if you took it and aren't loving your grade, you can retake it, and that's fine. You'll have until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. Okay. All right. So let's get into what we have going on this week. Okay. So I did want to kind of mention that I have this this announcement about ignoring the inactivity email. Those are sent out automatically from D2L if people haven't logged in within the past 6 to 7 days. Just ignore those from last week, but note that I'm going to turn that option back on so that if you do receive that email in the future, it means you're probably missing some work. Please get in touch with me. Let's make sure that you can move forward successfully. I'm going to go to the content area to look at this week's work. So I'm in week 5, right? These are the readings. So we have the Victorian Age and the biography for Alfred Lord Tennyson, and then the poem by Tennyson, The Lady of Shalott. So note that each of these requires its own entry in the reading journal, okay? That reading journal is going to be due on Sunday, okay? And I put, you know, be sure to use the MLA template. I'm down here, right? So watch the videos, the prompt is posted, all this stuff happens on Monday. Sometimes I do it on Sundays, right? But then that reading journal is kind of the focus of my attention because it's something new this week, right? So if you scroll down, there's the supplemental video, the paper topic post, and the paper topic is identified that instead of reading discussion post, just because the paper topic posts are those that later on in the semester you can actually go back to and revise for our eventual portfolio. So don't get thrown by the name. I didn't want you to see paper topic post and think, what's going on there? Just know that later on in the semester, we'll go back and be able to revise some of these that you pick and choose. But essentially, the requirements are the same in terms of posting and discussion posts in general. So part 1, we're going to connect the Romantic era to the Victorian. So thinking about the past and thinking about, you know, what is the present in our reading at least. Part 2 is asking you to really examine The Lady of Shalott, the poem. And I note that you need to pick 2 elements about the poem you want to examine. And I want you to think about things like language, rhyme pattern, symbolism. If these are terms that are not familiar to you, then just go to this link. It's to the Purdue Online Writing Lab website where there are explanations of them. But many of you, depending on the text that you have, there's also a glossary in your book that has these terms as well, okay? And then part 3, I need you to create 2 questions for your colleagues to answer. Okay, so 5 paragraphs overall, and then those 2 questions. Your response is due by Thursday, and then your response to 2 folks are due by Sunday. I'm going to pause for 1 second and come back. Sorry for the break. So in thinking about what we have next on the agenda for this week, after you complete that paper topic post that's due on Thursday, you have your reading journal assignment. And so here's a link for that. If you click on the link, it just takes you to the assignments area of D2L, and it has these instructions. So this is the first reading journal, right? You'll submit a couple over the course of the semester. It needs to be submitted in doc.x or PDF format. I can't open and grade anything outside of that. So make sure that you are saving as a Word file or a PDF. I put here to double check the formatting guidelines, so you can watch the video for the assignment and then read the guidelines here by clicking on this. It'll open up that document, right? And it'll kind of give you a refresher, as well as please use the template. Please download and use the template, because it's set up in the way with all the requirements. It's set up in MLA formatting, and it has different areas for your entries, right? And you can just copy and paste the blank ones if you need to add more entries based on how much we've read so far. So I put that for this submission, you'll need an entry for the Victorian age, right, which is for this week. The Alfred Lord Tennyson biography, because it is something that's separate, right? It's also something you can give Greenblatt credit for. And then the Lady of Shalott, which is by Tennyson, okay? And I put here, if you have entries for the readings prior to this, that will just be a bonus. I realized that I was giving out some conflicting information via email or in discussions, as well as on the syllabus. So to just clean the slate, if you have and created entries for those readings, you'll still get credit for it. But if you didn't do them because of the confusion, you won't be penalized, right? Starting now, though, once you submit that reading journal on Sunday, you need to then start a fresh new document. Just go back to the template and start a new one with every single reading. And what's kind of complicated about our class is that every time we read an author, we also read that author's biography, which is a separate text. So you need a separate entry for all of those. And that's why, because it is a lot of work, and I understand that, it's why we don't have multiple discussion posts a week. We just have our initial one and then our responses. I realize it's a lot of work, right? But it's also why the entries don't require a whole lot more information. You don't have to make really long entries for each of these. You just need to kind of show me that you've read, right? And bring in a quote and just do a little bit of work understanding the text that you're reading. And the biography should be really easy and straightforward to complete those entries for. It just takes some time, okay? I also want you to note that you have the quiz this week. So if I go back to week 5, you do have a quiz, and as I mentioned previously, because we were thrown off, quite a bit by everything that's happened over the past couple of weeks, quiz 5 is going to be a bit more extensive. It's going to be a higher points value than the previous quiz, so make sure that you're setting aside enough time, but also make sure you've done all the reading prior to beginning that. It'll take you a little bit longer than most quizzes because it's covering the weeks that we missed and the information from then and from now. But take your time, complete it to the best of your ability. You can take it however many times you need to. I wouldn't suggest you take it more than a couple of times, because you're just wasting your own time at that point. And that's why reading everything ahead is going to be pretty important. Also, the random word for this week's video is, I'm looking around, picture. So Frida Kahlo, we got a picture of her in the back. The random word is picture, so make sure that you include that in your quiz. As always, if you have any questions or concerns as we move forward into this week, just let me know. I know it's been kind of hard to get into a rhythm with this course because of things that have happened over the past 2 weeks, but we will find that rhythm, don't worry. If you're feeling a little out of it, you're not alone. If you have questions, you can reach out to me, or as always, post in the Q&A discussion area. You can answer one another's questions in there. If I see an answer that's not as correct as it could be, I will go in and offer some input, but that is definitely a space where you can communicate and ask questions to one another, but I will also go in there as well. All right, y'all, hang in there. Hope you're doing well, and good luck this week.